knows, and Xbox One is always listening. Frightening, frightening, frightening stuff, right? I've been living in the last 3 months in the preparation for this presentation in perpetual fear, right? I'm not going to be here to fearmonger, and I saw a couple of tweets about not selling tin hats. I'm not going to do that, right? This is not fear that isn't founded, and what I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes that we have together is share some of my hopes, some of my aspirations for what we can do in the room, the role that we have in transforming higher education and transforming the future. But I want to start with a couple of findings that I discovered in the last 3 months as I was putting this presentation together. Let's look at it real quick. 58% of students can't go more than an hour without checking their phones. 58%. Any faculty in the room? Can you attest to that? Do you see that happening in your classrooms? Right? There you go. It's the first thing you do when you wake up, the last thing you do before you go to sleep. At Ryerson University, we logged that the average touch points, the average times that a user touches their phone during the normal day, from the time that they wake up to the time that they leave our institution, is somewhere in the ballpark of 340, right? In an hour, they switch 30 screens. 73% claim they can't study without technology. Astounding number. 73% claim they can't study without technology. So it's not enough for them to be sitting in front of their books anymore, to be surrounded by their friends, giving you your undivided attention. They also have to have the second screen with them. And studies link social media to dopamine release. I was a little on the fence with this one for the last couple of years. I said I was going to wait for more conclusive research to come through. And finally, across the board, it has been scientifically proven by university study after university study that social media usage, likes, retweets, favorites, follows, are just as addicting as chocolate, as alcohol, as booze, and in some case, sex. Right? This has been proven. How debilitating is it when you post a picture of yourself on Facebook, right, and you don't get any likes? You feel like you don't exist. It's a sad thing, right? We still don't trust them though, right? In spite of our dependence on this technology, right? And I'm jumping to conclusions here. We're not all dependent on the technology just yet, but I'll talk about that in a little while. But incoming students, right? The incoming cohort of students, as much as these digital natives are using these technologies, they still don't trust them. 2 out of 3 active users do not trust the sites they're engaging with online. And 69% feel less control over their personal info today than they did 5 years ago, right? But here is the clincher, and this is what has been keeping me up at night. We could care less, right? 36% say privacy is less important to them than it was 5 years ago. So in spite of the fact that we recognize that we have less control, less autonomy, less power over what we can do with our data, we're not bothered by it. And the one astounding stat over here was the last one over here. Only 9% of students are very concerned about privacy. Only 9%. And it makes me wonder if everyone in the room over here has seen a world before digital natives. We've experienced a world in which the personal computer wasn't a household item. We were in a time before the internet, but now generations that are coming into our schools, coming into U Ottawa, coming into Ryerson, coming into the respective institutions that you represent, it makes me wonder if they think that this is a normal thing. That the necessary trade-off for them to use Facebook, Twitter, their phones, Xbox One devices is the relinquishment of privacy. Does privacy hold the same weight as we regard it in the room? So I want to talk to everyone about 3 things today, minus the formatting error over there. The first is understanding our world, using dystopian fiction, especially dystopian science fiction, to understand our world. Right? And I'll explain why I'm so fascinated by this, but I feel like we can revert or look back to texts such as Brave New World and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984 to help inform what we see the world becoming with the advance of technology and innovation and where we see the world going. I also want to draw some parallels between our world and the worlds depicted in these 2 texts, as well as some other films and some other books. Right? You see a picture over here of what's happening in Turkey, the Arab Spring Revolution, direct correlation between social media usage, technology usage, and the revolutions that took place in that part of the world. Right? For the first time, people were able to collaborate and mobilize in ways that wasn't previously available to them. And then last but not least, I want to share, as I mentioned earlier, some threats that I see that are posed by the innovations in technology that are moving at a speed that is faster than everyone in the room can comprehend, and the opportunities that we have as higher education and IT professionals. Does anyone have any questions before we begin? I realize that I speak really, really quickly sometimes. It's because I get so excited about this stuff. So if that happens, just be like, Hamza, calm down. So a little bit about me, right? Born in New York, moved to Toronto. So you could say my life was spent between 2 metropolises, metropoli, if that's the plural. Can someone correct me? So my life was spent between two bustling cities. And so you could say to some extent, watching rapid change, situating myself in environments where there were a lot of people, a great mixture of people, diversities in terms of culture, race, religion, background, socioeconomic status, so on and so forth, was very much part and parcel of my life, right? I was born, not to date myself, I was born early enough to witness a world in which the personal computer wasn't a household item, but late enough to witness the swift change from that point to where we find ourselves now. I'm also lucky to work at this place over here, Ryerson University. Right? At Ryerson, I have the luxury of having the most, to my estimation, the best focus group I could ask for. At any given time, I have 10,000 students coming from different parts of the GTA, all congregating at Ryerson University. I like to think that they're the tastemakers of tomorrow, the buzzmakers. They're using the latest and greatest technologies. They bring a wide variety of perspectives, backgrounds, as I mentioned earlier. And then I work over here as well, Splash Effect, right? Company that I started in January, which helps me extend the work that I'm doing for Ryerson for different brands, higher education and beyond. But my story and my love story with dystopian fiction and the world we find ourselves began 7 years ago at the University of Toronto Scarborough, where I was an English literature student, right? Specifically, two professors had a profound impact on me. The first was Professor Gary Leonard, media studies professor, and the second was Professor Amanda Peet, English literature professor. And at any given time in the 5 years that I spent at university, yes, I spent 5 years at university in my undergrad, at any given time I was taking their classes simultaneously. And it was an interesting relationship because one professor would teach me about the politics and the power behind media, understanding media, becoming more media literate, media ecology, and that was Gary Leonard in a cinema and modernity class. We would take genres of movies and break them down. The first one was science fiction, right? And at the same time, in Amanda Peet's class, I was studying dystopian literature. So I was reading all the old books, all the way from Plato's Republic, all the way right up until The Matrix, all the way up until Marianne Satrapi's Persepolis. And an interesting thing was happening at the same time because I was referring to one text, I was referring to the text in one course and the other. So I spent 5 years just concentrated and focused on the subject. So I'm super excited to share that with everyone today. And this is when things changed for me. I stumbled into the U of T bookstore and I found this book, Neil Postman. If anyone is going to read any book this year, please make it this one. I exhort you to read this book, right? This was a game changer for me, right? The premise of the book is very simple, and I think I'm going to bring it back to the NSA experience over here. So I opened it up, and in the first paragraph, it said something to the approximation of this, and I'm just going to regurgitate. It says that television is a one-way medium. We receive information. We receive a barrage of information, especially when you're watching primetime news. CNN, CBC, Fox News, you're receiving a stream of information coming at you. Information that is important, information that necessitates reflection, information that you need to spend time to reflect on, think about, break down, engage with critically. But that is impossible given the speed at which you're receiving it, the inability for you to communicate and interact with it, and worse is that this information is juxtaposed and interspersed with Colgate ads, keeping up with the Kardashian ads, and every ad that renders the information that you previously received moot and sterile, right? And that took me aback. I said, whoa, I've been living my life wrong here, right? I was a regular consumer of the news. I still am, but now I'm a lot more critical about the news, about the juxtapositions, about the power plays. If anyone is following what's happening with the NSA right now and the scandal, there is a huge concerted smear effort, right? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you do see it in some publications, an effort to smear the personality and smear the person of Edward Snowden, right? It's left to be seen what happens with him, if he's extradited by Hong Kong, if he's tried in court. But right now, what we see is guilty by media, guilty by Twitter, right? And I think this is a uniquely Canadian preoccupation of media literacy, right? This man over here, Marshall McLuhan, famous for coining the phrase, brownie points, anyone? Right on, there you go. The medium is the message. The work being done by our CRTC, the work being done by the elementary levels, the higher education levels, independent boards, are all doing a great job of educating everyone in the room, our children, and the future generations, in terms of what they should be aware of when they are consuming media. It's not enough to simply consume media as it is consumed in other parts of the world as an exercise in receiving information and just driving conversions for marketers, but we have to critically engage with the media that we have. More so in this day and age where there are multiple ways to engage. Right? It's not just about the television anymore. When Neil Postman wrote that book, we're talking about 40 years ago, right? 40 years ago, when the only piece of information or the only concerning medium that he was referring to at the time was radio and television. Now we are in the second screen revolution, where we do have the ability to engage, where everyone has a back channel, right? The Oscars were the most viewed Oscars of all time, this past Oscars. Why? Because everyone had the ability to criticize and weigh in. It's not just about receiving the information about who's the best dressed anymore. You have the ability to do that. Did anyone watch the recent Super Bowl? Right? If anyone watched the recent Super Bowl, the most viewed Super Bowl of all time. Why? Because you're starting to see the ability for people to tune in passively. So I'm ultimately left with this question. Can we shape the future? Can everyone in this room shape the future? Right? And I hope to spend the next couple of minutes exploring that with you. I do think that we can, especially everyone in the room, given the proximity we have to students, the future, given the proximity that we have to faculty, right, the minds that are responsible for creating the books like Amusing Ourselves to Death, the books like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984, and the work that we do over here that influences the future, but in turn we are influenced by. So let's start by talking about dystopian fiction and the importance of dystopian fiction in understanding the world. Gary Leonard put it best. Fiction helps us rehearse scenarios, right? Rehearse scenarios that are taking place in modernity. Scenarios that we experience to help us alleviate some of the myths of modernity, progress, efficiency, perfection, satisfaction, innovation. But in particular, with dystopian science fiction, we get to rehearse the scenario of man versus machine, of the interface between man and technology. Right? This movie over here, perfect example of a tenuous, strained relationship between a human and a robot, based on Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, I believe. So let's run through a couple of popular Hollywood scenarios over here. Brownie points for anyone who can recognize this scene. Terminator, nice, I heard it. Right? One of my favorite opening scenes of all time. I'm going to go in order of, I guess, the most reflective of our world at this given time to the most extreme extrapolation of what could happen in a world run amok in which we are not critical of the media and the technology that we're consuming. So let's start with Minority Report. Excellent scene in which Tom Cruise's character is walking through a mall and biometric scanners read his eyes and give him recommendations on what to buy, on what to wear. They know him by name. And this is already happening, not at the eye level. We haven't reached the biometric scanning level, or at least that connection hasn't been made. The technology exists, but the connection hasn't been made between shopping and that. However, in some stores, for example, in diesel stores, in some select diesel stores, you can go try on an outfit, go into the change room, and then log into your Facebook account in the change room, and by way of two-way camera, you could show your friends what you're wearing and they can vet whether or not it's a good purchase or not. Right? Interesting stuff. And this technology came out in 2007, way ahead of its time. So you can imagine everyone was like, oh, I'm not going to use this. But in this day and age, it's entirely possible where you have websites that clearly contacts that log every keystroke of yours, that are able to look at pictures of glass that you've tried on, give you recommendations, and essentially customize the experience for you. Are we here yet? I do think we are here yet. I think that almost every realization that has been made in dystopian fiction, whether in Hollywood, whether in text, with the exception of Starfleet and with the exception of teleportation, has already been recognized. RoboCop, an interesting world in which we give, or when we entrust our safety and our security to cyborgs, right? It's not enough for human police officers to go and police the world. We need to augment them with the ability to withstand a barrage of bullets, endure combat, be a lot more methodical and precise in the way that they operate. And then Blade Runner, an interesting world in which the difference between humans and replicants, or humans and cyborgs, is indistinguishable. It is the crux of the movie, in which you have the character played by Harrison Ford trying to hunt down replicants, and he has a tough time over the span of the movie trying to find out who is human and who isn't. And then The Matrix, right? A discussion about this is impossible without discussing The Matrix. Perfect example of a world in which we've been enslaved by humanity and are being used as a battery source, right? And in which we engage with the alternate reality, the real world, so to speak, in which we engage with it in a way that feels very real. It feels very much like the reality in which we're in right now. And then 2001: A Space Odyssey, one of my favorite movies of all time. Favorite movies of all time because it simplifies this strained relationship between man and technology, right? Classic scene, open the pod bay doors, Hal. I'm sorry, I can't do that, right? Because in the purview of HAL 9000, sorry. Has anyone seen this movie, by the way? Has everyone seen this movie? Right, in the purview of HAL 9000, and this is a machine that was put on board a spaceship, which was used to regulate the crew's health, their sleep, right, their destination. The crew was on autopilot. The crew was just running around, exercising, playing chess the entire time, right? And they gave all the responsibilities of maintaining their lives and the mission to this machine, to the point where the machine, within its purview, decided that humans were inefficient and not suited to complete the mission. And so within its purview, it decided to eliminate them, right? And this is exactly what happened in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then the furthest extrapolation I can find about a world run amok by the strained relationship between humans and technology is the Terminator, in which the machines are literally pursuing us with reckless abandon, right? With malice, with intent of malice, with intent to kill, and they are extinguishing the human race. It is an all-out apocalypse, right? So ultimately, Fiction helps us understand the relationship between man and machine in a way that's easy to digest, in a way that we can refer to in a fable-like sense, in a way that we can always look to and help to understand some of the trends that are shaping our world and be mindful of any forks in the road and any cautionary tales. But why is this so compelling? Right? Why is this so compelling? Why does this genre recur time and again? Why is it that the top 10 movies of all time, grossing movies of all time, have elements of science fiction and worlds fallen apart with the result of technology gone astray? Well, that's because we are losing money to technology. We're literally losing jobs. People are being fired en masse for jobs that can be done easier, more cost efficiently, right, and with more precision by machines. Perfect example, HAL 9000. That's an extrapolation of this situation. Right? You see over here, the GM plant's been overrun by humans, overrun by technology. It'd be weird if it was overrun by humans. We're losing time to technology. There's no shortage of distractions available to us by way of our phone, by way of the multiple devices that we have. The entire marketing construct, the entire media construct is designed to give us what we want when we want. Right? It was so easy for me over the flight over here to keep myself busy. There were times where I'd have to refer to a book. Now, don't get me wrong, I did read a book on the way here, but how easy would it be for me to keep myself distracted for the 1 hour flight over here? Angry Birds, Friends with Words, right? 4 pictures, ebooks, movies, music, everything at my disposal. And this is another fear. We're losing ourselves to technology. Right? That there are real sociological, behavioral, psychological shifts taking place, paradigm shifts taking place. It's impossible now to encounter sitting across from somebody at a dinner table where their phones are not on the table, where their phones are not, active, where you have to make a concerted effort to ask them to put away their phones, where people are now reverting and going back into their shells on the bus, on the train. People are less social in person. People are more social online. There are several shifts that are taking place in which we are becoming symbiotically connected to our devices. Right? We're at the point right now where we're talking about wearable technology, Google Glass, the Apple Watch, where technology is not going to become an active process that you remove from your pocket and you engage with, where it happens passively. So how did we get here? Let's do a quick run through of the steps that we took to get to this level of Google Glass with the understanding that this is going to help us determine a trajectory, right? And help us predict where we're going to land in the next couple of years. So we obviously started as an oral culture, talking to each other, sharing sounds, attributing those sounds to people, objects, things, ideas, and then we needed a way to log those words. So we created the phonetic alphabet, a way to write down history, a way to write down ideas, a way to store information, right? But we needed a way to also replicate that information en masse. So we invented the Gutenberg press. And with the Gutenberg press, we were able to duplicate the words, duplicate the ideas, and duplicate stories, and duplicate them en masse and give them and distribute them to the masses. But we also needed, given this influx, or given, the proliferation of information and the proliferation of text, we needed gatekeepers of knowledge, we needed gatekeepers of information. And so universities, and publishers were created, right? To be the gatekeepers, to hold onto this information and to disseminate it. But we needed to get across borders, so we invented the telegraph, a way to move this information across geographical borders. And then new mediums were invented, the radio and the television. And we could start sharing sound, we could start sharing moving picture. And then personal computers. Personal computers came around, the democratization of the ability to produce information, consume information, and do it from the touch of your fingers, and do it from the comfort of your own homes. And then we entered into the internet and social media age. I read a great tweet this morning that said, the world is being changed by social media. So what, right? What's next? In the words of a snarky 16-year-old. We all know that. This is something that we talked about in CANHEIT 3 years ago, right? The changing digital revolution, how social media is going to change everything. We are in a vastly different world now. We are here. We are in the digital layer, right? The digital layer is when it's impossible for you to wake up and move in your daily base, move throughout your day without encountering some form of technology that is tracking you, tracking your activities, in which you are actively engaging with the devices, in which the devices are engaging with each other, right? Devices for everything now, apps for everything, apps that are meant to expedite your world, apps that are meant to be convenient for you to use. So let's dive into this. Let's get into the meat and potatoes, the fun stuff over here. Brave New World was very much a book about the fear of big business, right? About the ability of big business to render our society to be one that conforms to these principles: community, identity, and stability. Right? The world in Brave New World was all about community, identity, and stability. They revered a man by the name of Henry Ford, who in our world is the founder of the Ford Automobile Company. right? Industrialist worship was taking place over here, and they looked to the attributes and they looked to the very facets of the Henry Ford Company and applied them to the human world. So they looked to the world of machines, they looked to the world of technology, they looked at things like efficiency, practicality, pristineness, and applied it to this. The first thing I want to touch on that was a core facet of Brave New World was a cult of positivity. This is something that has been frightening me ever since I read about this. Right? When you think about it, it's embedded into the social media that we use. It's embedded into the language. There are likes, there are no dislikes. There are favorites, there are no unfavorites. There's shares, there's no hoard. Right? There's comments, there's not vociferate. The entire social media construct is designed around this idea of putting you in the ideal state of mind in which to engage with one another and share in positivity, share bite-sized information, and ultimately, for the sake of marketers, like pages, right? Click on ads. Do things that you would do normally if you were in a good state of mind. Similar to retail theory, you walk into a retail store, if the music is right, if the ambiance is right, if the people are very friendly to you, the cashiers, the customer service personnel, you are more likely to buy, right? It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. The cult of positivity is something that Aldous Huxley warned us about. Are we there yet? I think we are, right? And this is how he described it in his book. He said people are happy. They get what they want. They're well off. They're safe. They're not ill. They're not afraid of death. They're so conditioned that they practically can't help behaving as they ought to behave. Think about that for a second. Then compulsive behavior. Hinted at this earlier, right? Students are unable to go an hour without checking their phone, 58% of them, right? We crossed the threshold in which devices outnumbered humans about 3 years ago. And that number is ever expanding. The order of magnitude is incredible at this point. You said it yourself, sir. You can't go an hour without checking the phone yourself, right? I know I can't. We are in an age where we are compulsive, right? We are using devices compulsively. Never put off till tomorrow the fun you can have today. Right? If everything is at your disposal, why should there be any deference of pleasure? Why should you defer pleasure? Why should you defer the ability to access information, no matter how trivial? Right? Why do we have to guess about things anymore? The Guinness Book of World Records doesn't need to exist anymore because we can just Google it. If we ever have a debate at a bar, if we ever have a debate with one another, if we need to access a piece of information, you can get it right now. There's no need to wait for anything in this day and age. And then technology dependence, right? Are we here yet? Well, let's see what Aldous Huxley said about it. I suppose John told you what I had to suffer, and not a gram of soma to be had. And the character who read this line over here, she was taken away from her ability to release dopamine for an extended period of time. Right? How debilitating is it when we are away from our devices, when we run out of our batteries? How lost do we feel? Marx wrote to Hegel, I'm pronouncing that wrong, he wrote to him in a letter and he said something to the approximation of, we are all walking around under 20,000 cubic feet of pressure, but no one realizes it. No one feels it. Right? We have subjected ourselves to an infrastructure of devices and technology in which if everything were to shut down, we wouldn't know what to do. The boarding passes that I used to get on the flight this morning were attached to my phone and I had 13% of my battery left. I was panicking. I said, if my battery runs out, I'm not going to be able to get onto this plane. Where the obvious solution, stupid Hamza, just go print it out. Right? That's the way it has been done. There are fail-safes for this. But I mean, the way I'm conditioned, the way I think that my phone is able to do everything. The passbook is certainly making that easier to do. The digital wallet. And over-organization. I don't know how I feel about this one. I feel like it's a necessary evil. I don't think it's an evil per se, but I think it should be done. But we have millions of dollars. In the case of the PRISM project, which is essentially the crux of the NSA problem that we have, $20 million a year goes into over-organization, right? The logging of information, logging of keystrokes, the monitoring of phone calls, the monitoring of text messages, right? Data that is on its own inconclusive, that you can't do anything with, but in any case, they are expanding capacity to be able to ingest this amount of data that they can ultimately do something with, right? Bringing it back to Minority Report, I had a debate with my boss this morning, and I told her about this, and I told her about how much is churning my stomach and how upset I am about the whole prison and NSA scandal. And she said, Hamza, you have nothing to worry about. And I was like, that's not the point, Leslie. And she said, well, I have nothing to worry about either because I know that I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not planning to subvert the government anytime soon. I'm not planning to murder anyone. I'm not planning to build a bomb, right? Why should I be worried if the government has access to my data? Well, think back to Minority Report. Remember the precogs, the three little mutants that were hovering in the pool that were preempting crimes before they happened, right? It's not about who you are now, it's about who you will become in the future and the conditions of the world. And all it would take is for some crafty analyst or analyst body to be able to parse together information and create a narrative about you, create probability, create cause, right? Tell a story about you. And I'm going to talk about that in a second when I talk about Julian Assange. But mark my words, watch how this Edward Snowden case plays out. You're already seeing the government dig deep into his past and pull out information about him that has nothing to do with the information that he presented, right? Again, what did Aldous Huxley say about this? 96 identical twins working 96 identical machines. The voice was almost tremulous with enthusiasm. You really know where you are for the first time in history, right? If anyone attended South by Southwest, I didn't, but the #1 trend coming out of South by Southwest was this idea of big data, of accumulating the data that has been granted to us, to marketers, over the social graph over the last 6 or 7 years since Facebook has been around, interactions on e-commerce portals, on Twitter, and using that data to construct individual narratives about all of you. At the moment, those narratives are going to be used to give you better advertising, a more personalized experience on the websites that you frequent. But what can that data be used for also, right? And then vanity, right? This is one we can't get around. Does anyone here use Clout to measure their social influence? Thank God, right? Clout.com essentially gives you a score. It gives you a report card based on your connected social media profiles to this website. You connect your Facebook, you connect your Twitter, your LinkedIn, and for example, the algorithm, as shady as it is, has some credence to it. If you have majority of your connections on LinkedIn as executives or higher, you get a higher score, right? If you get a lot more likes on your Facebook compared to your friends, it gives you a higher score. If you get a lot more retweets than your friends, you get a higher Clout score. Right? And some people compulsively check their Clout score as a direct reflection of who they are. Their sense of self is anchored into their online experience. Right? And so you have Zoolander over here, the pinnacle of vanity in some ways. Right? We're cultivating a generation of Ben Stiller and Zoolander characters, like whatever his name was. I forgot what it was. It was Zoolander, wasn't it? Derek Zoolander. It worries me. It does. Check this out. What did Aldous Huxley say about vanity in Brave New World? Gammas are stupid. They all wear green, and Delta children wear khaki. I don't want to play with Delta children, and Epsilons are still worse. They're too stupid, right? We're very much in a subjective world in which we are gawkers. Everyone in the room are gawkers. You spend time on Facebook just scrolling through your news feed, looking at people, looking at pictures of cats, looking at pictures of people getting married, looking at pictures, posing selfies, and everyone has an opinion. It's healthy to have an opinion, but I mean, we're able to do this to no end, sorry. And then one that I hinted at earlier, right? Industrial worship. I'm not an Apple fanboy by any stretch of the imagination, right? I think at one point I was. Certainly that enthusiasm was weaned away. But I mean, just look at Steve Jobs. Just go on Twitter and search for the Steve Jobs hashtag right now in light of what's happening with the WWDC conference and the iOS 7 release. And you hear people saying, I miss Steve, I miss Steve. What would Steve have done? Right, a book that I was reading today, I couldn't get through 3 pages at a time in which the author wasn't referencing Steve Jobs and the way business was done according to him, right? We are very much in a post-Steve Jobs world, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to discredit the man. I'm not trying to say that the way he took the companies that he worked with and brought them to the levels that they were was anything less than astounding. But I mean, we are at a place right now where you look across the marketing, technology, and startup sectors, and people are revering this man, right? As he's the authority on all things digital, and all things social media, and all things design, UX, so on and so forth. Very much part and parcel of Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. You all remember, I suppose, that beautiful and inspired saying of our Fords, history is bunk, right? Where we stop looking to ourselves, we stop looking to innovation as part of the community and look to this mythical figure that we place on a pedestal. And last but not least, the one that has my imagination these days, the quantified self. Does anyone here own a Nike Fuel Band? Interesting. Does anyone here use any apps to track any element of their well-being and health? Any sleep apps? What do you use? MyFitnessPal. Saw another hand over there. Fitbit. I use Fitbit as well. Saw a hand over there.
It's a separate.
Right on. People are using apps to be able to track themselves, right? To be able to collect stats on the things that they do, their sleeping patterns. In the case of Nike Fuel Band, how much you've run. You can compare that data with the runners. You can compare it against your former self. With Fitbit, you can track your weight loss. If you have any weight-related goals or any eating goals, you can track that with various apps on your iOS or whatever device that you have, right? We're moving towards a day and age where we're starting to what's going on here? Where we're starting to replicate the functions of machines, or at least thinking like machines, thinking in terms of assessment. Now, I know that in a lot of the work that we do in higher education, assessment is huge, right? We're all talking about assessment. How can we assess the work that we do? How can we demonstrate value on it? That same framework and that same way of thinking is being applied to what we're doing over here. So 100 repetitions, 3 nights a week for 4 years, thought Bernard Marx, who was a specialist in hypnopedia. 60,400 repetitions make one truth. Got the 5-minute warning, so I'm gonna have to speed through this really quickly. So Big Brother, right? A warning on intrusive government, right? War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. George Orwell. Government intervention, in the case of Julian Assange. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Given the work that he was doing through WikiLeaks to try and expose the government, all it took for the government was to dig back into his past and find out that he committed aggravated rape, right? Horrible. But again, that information was not available to you and I. It was available to the government by way of their ability to log information, to dig deep into the past. One nation under CCTV, surveillance technology. Big Brother's watching you, right? We hear that all the time. And compliance, check this out. Last year alone, the government tried to request information from Twitter in regards to Anonymous shutdowns. So Anonymous, the hacker group that tried to take down a couple of websites and any other crime-related activities. How often do you think Twitter complied with the government request to access user information? 69% of the time. 69% of the time, Twitter complied with the government to give them your information. Frightening stuff. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. Right? George Orwell saw this coming. Part of the prison project, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, next is Dropbox, they're saying. What do you really own anymore other than the few cubic centimeters inside your skull? And then draconian policies, SOPA and PIPA, right? Much hubbub was made in the last couple of years about these policies. George Orwell saw this coming. He said they could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them, and were not sufficiently interested in public events to notice what was happening. Time and again, you see these draconian policies implemented. We are shocked. There's an uproar. People get scared. They recede. And then after a while, these companies reinstitute them in a much more smaller, minute, passive form. And then over time, you essentially re-sign the same policies that were given at the initial onset of the shock and awe tactic. And then this one, the one that's frightening me, always on. I'm an Xbox fan, but if I want to buy the Xbox One, it has to always be on. Right? And how creepy is it to have that camera device at the top left over there in your living room, always on, always watching what you do? Right? Couldn't be further from George Orwell's reality of the telescreen. The instrument, the telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of completely shutting it off. And then language degradation, right? I don't know how I feel about this one, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with speaking in lolcat speak, right? I think it's fun, but what I am concerned about is the reduction of thoughts to 140 characters, if not less and less and less. Don't you see the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the language of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Frightening stuff. And algorithmic everything, right? Duo of composers known as Stargate. They've produced hit songs for Nicki Minaj, Rihanna, Katy Perry, every pop princess, every diva you can think of. Why? Because they base it on algorithms. What's going to work? The chord variation, the lyrical content, right? It was one of those countless similar songs published for the benefit of the pros. The words of these songs were composed without any human intervention, whatever, on the instrument known as the Facilitator. And this does not just apply to music, right? And I've seen this happen. I've sat in on meetings when I was in internet music, Sony Music, and I watched them construct and sit down with these artists and talk about the song composition. And they would look back to historical performances of songs and they would say, you know what, this song, because it had the following elements, it's likely that if you incorporate it into this song, it'll work, right? They're Frankensteining art together. And you see this with movies especially, right? I watched the movie Fast 6 the other day. Literally, if you watch Fast 6 and if you watch any of the Fast and the Furious movies, Fast 6 is an amalgamation of everything that made the first 5 movies work. So literally, you can see the studio executives sitting in a room saying, oh, you know, in the first movie, Vin Diesel, in the second movie, Explosion, the third movie, Car in Tokyo, and they just put it all together in one movie, hoping it would perform well. And did it perform well? You bet it did, right? So looking back, I'm going to skip this next part over here. I'll share this with you afterwards. I have 1 minute left. Leave you with these thoughts. What afflicted the people in the Brave New World was not that they were laughing instead of thinking, but they did not know what they were laughing about and why they had stopped thinking. So some of the threats that I see as a result of the world that we're moving into, a loss of autonomy, right? We're losing the ability to control our data, to control our privacy functions, to control everything that we value as humans. And then relinquishing ourselves to a dependence on machinery, on technology that can be shut off easily, that we could run out of the natural materials necessary to support this way of life, to support this ecosystem, and then a submission to authority. This is the one that I'm most afraid of, given what's happening with the NSA, right? Up until the last 48 hours, we didn't think that we were in George Orwell's 1984. I was firmly ready to come here and tell everyone that we are very much in the Brave New World. But now I have to reverse my stance. We are exactly in the middle. We are teetering on the brink of 1984, given what has happened. But I do see opportunities. It's not all doom and gloom. I look to Star Trek especially as an example of a utopia, a world in which technology was used to advance the human race, in which we could all live together in harmony, right? Advance around a common cause, innovation, cross geographical, gender-based, religious-based, species-based boundaries, and work towards a common goal. But again, looking at this with very much rose-colored glasses. But the one things I do see that are very relevant to us over here, accelerated learning, the ability for technology to enhance the work that we do, right? Maybe we're going to move away from long drawn-out classes and long drawn-out curriculums and programs. As much as I'm a supporter of that model, I do think that we're seeing the advancement of things such as MOOCs, online learning, at-your-time learning, mobile learning. It's possible for you now in one weekend to learn the foundations of a new language based on a device that you have, to convert your downtime into uptime with apps. You can literally be Neo and plug into the Matrix and learn Kung Fu. And the open world, right? As frightening as some of their mission statements can be, Facebook is very much committed to the idea of opening the world and making it open and making all of us connected over here. And there's something to be said about that, right? Opens up an exciting new possibility for us to share the work that we do and really follow that trajectory that I hinted at earlier, from oral culture to the Gutenberg press to the digital layer, and take it to a whole other level. Where the work that we do over here, whether in Ottawa or whether you're in Ryerson, you can spread that work, you can spread that ideas in the way that we're doing right now in all new ways. I mean, this is a perfect example. I'm sharing, hopefully people are tuning into a classroom that are not even here. Hello everyone. Hope everyone's doing all right. And then big data, the one I'm most excited by, right? As much as this is a tool to be used by big business and big brother to construct stories and narratives about us for the purposes of preventing sedition and for the purposes of selling us things, at the same time it can be used by all of us to personalize the university and college experience. So the last couple of slides over here, what do we do now, right? Where do we go? We have to monitor Big Brother. If Big Brother is surveilling us, we have to surveil it, right? Do exactly what we're doing right now, sharing ideas. And I hope that everyone over here we can carry on this discussion afterwards, share ideas with one another, speak to your representatives, speak to each other, speak to faculty, speak to professors, speak to administration, speak to your students, right? And get them to start thinking of this, let them be cognizant of this. And then monitor big business, right? Be mindful of the data that you're giving up. There are websites right now, and I will share them with CANHEIT after this, in which you can summarize terms of use. Right? Oftentimes, whenever you're signing up for a new app, you see this Kafka-esque terms of use policy that you just skip to the bottom and you press agree for. There are now apps in which you can dump them into a text file and summarize and get the pain points for you. Right? This exists. And then we ultimately have to decide, are we moving towards an enabling autonomy, the one we're in right now, or disabling authority? This is entirely a personal question. Right? Depending on which side of the political spectrum you fall under, maybe a disabling authority is what you want. But I think that, given the freedom that we're all experiencing and the awesome world that we live in, I think we all want to move towards an enabling autonomy in which we have control of our data, have control of our futures, and we ultimately have to decide this, a blueprint or a manifesto. What is the project we're going to work on that's going to help guide the work that we do, help influence the future, but at the same time, allow us to be flexible and react to the changes that are happening as we sit over here. Right, and beyond. And with that, thank everyone for coming out today, much appreciated, and I will open the floor for questions. I hope I didn't scare anyone. Does anyone have any questions? Question?
One of the things that you brought up in the talk was the fault of positivity that you see in a lot of the offerings that are out there. How do you sort of reconcile that with the inevitable sniping that goes on in a lot of things like reviews of movies or reviews of a newspaper article? It becomes almost a viral negative, just almost the opposite.
Right, and a lot of the work that I've done has been with brands that have complained to me saying that their comment features, no one comments on their blogs anymore, no one comments on content anymore, no one is publishing long form answers. Everything's being given in the snippet of a tweet, 140 character tweet, or a like, or just a share, right? And so it makes me wonder where the people that are critical of things are going, right? Because I mean, at least on the Facebook feed that I have right now, every now and then I'll see a rant, every now and then I'll see somebody complain, every now and then I'll see somebody on Twitter vociferate, but I mean, it gets buried under the torrent of positive comments, right? A new meme will be out, right? A new trending topic is gonna push all these negative comments away. And you hear this time and again with different brands saying that, don't worry about that negative comment, don't worry about the tweet, don't worry about the troll, ignore it and it will die, right? You take the eyeballs away and you rob it of power. So it makes me wonder, and that's a great question. Ultimately, where do you go for long form content, long form debate? And I think that happens here at the university level and here at the college level, which is so important for having classroom settings where we can engage with each other. I think that is being lost, and I don't know what the online equivalent of that looks like yet. You know, you still see in some forums and in some websites, especially newspaper websites, or that sounds weird, it's a paradox, really, newspaper websites, news sites, right, where you have people engaging and people going in a back and forth that's constructive and trying to resolve some questions. So I hand over here.
First of all, thanks. This is absolutely.
Oh, thanks so much.
It was just too much here to talk about.
Okay,
but let me just pause that last comment. When you think about long form arguments, I don't know if you know David Weinberger's work, too big to know, but he talks about changing the epistemology because of this kind of interconnectivity and all this on fire. And his argument is long form thinking is an artifact of literacy.
Really?
Not what we're having now, which is going to be an artifact of highly ubiquitous technology. So he starts talking about knowledge constructed in an online interconnected network world as being very different and being consumed and created very different. So one of the wonderful metaphors he has is that we no longer need to think about knowledge as a library, but knowledge as a playlist.
Wow.
And if you sort of run that sort of metaphor around a little bit, you end up with not a dystopian sort of view of how knowledge is created, but actually quite an interactive, friendly, and sort of human aspect of epistemology. So take a look at it. But one other comment was I really hope you read Technology.
I have, yes. Yeah. I think you struck on a lot of great points, and hopefully we can chat after this. But I see such a fine line between using this well and using this for the work that we do, and then encouraging businesses and encouraging government to use it for the opposite end. Right. So as an administrator, and I have limited access to students in the way that you have, and you have their undivided attention, or every hour you have a fragment of their attention. But I think I would like to work very closely with Ryerson's faculty, and certainly with any faculty that I can communicate with, to see if you can do just what you said and employ that playlist style of learning. Right. Oh, right. Dream of Star Trek died with the ending of the space shuttle program. Are the worst offenders those seeking control, NSA, or those seeking money, business? What does the power struggle between these entities look like, or will there be a convergence? I actually had that thought on the way here. Thank you so much for that. I do think they are bedfellows, right? Check this out. So part of the prison program, oh, can I just show you a quick clip? Right, it's just 2 minutes. I forgot about this.
You've got 2 minutes.
Okay, awesome.
We'll just say thank you right now.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to share this with you. So this is Edward Snowden. But to answer that question, so Mark Zuckerberg went on record to say he did not know of the prison program until 2009, right? He did not know of the prison program. Sorry, let me backtrack. Mark Zuckerberg came on record to say he did not know of the prison program at all, whereas it was documented that in 2009, according to an NSA slideshow, that Facebook was already willingly giving information over to the NSA. Someone's lying here, Zuckerberg or the NSA. Right? Since 2007, every public tweet has been archived by the US Library of Congress. Now, what does the US Library of Congress have to do with Twitter? Right? Why do they need access to those tweets? All I'm tweeting about is what I had for dinner, right? A picture of my feet on the beach, right? And occasionally I'll rant about things. But again, like I said, I think they make perfect bedfellows because private interests, right? Business that's interested in selling you things, looking at this big data, but also that big data, that set of data can be used to tell another story about control, to tell a story about predicting criminality, to predict subversion. Will I see there? Do I think there's going to be a convergence? Yes, I do, and you can already see this, right? You can already see this with willing agencies, willing companies that are willingly giving up data to the government, right? Verizon, for example, perfect example. Verizon has already been giving all of your information to the government. Phone calls, text messages, keystrokes, right? Even if you typed in half a text message and changed your mind, said, you know what, I probably shouldn't send that. Backspace, it recorded all of that. So we're already here. What business does Verizon have sharing that information with the government? I mean, are there incentives? There probably are. We don't know. And this story is unfolding. In the next 48 hours or the next couple of hours, especially in the last 48, we've already seen a change in the way we think and the way we look at the relationship that I previously thought was a divide. I previously thought that big business was here, big brother was here. And they were always going to fight against each other. But I mean, you look at the deals that Obama signed in the States, And Harper's having to answer some tough questions around the NSA scandal as well. Pay attention to the news and see what's happening, right? I think there will be a convergence, in my humble opinion. Quick clip and some of the fears that Edward Snowden has.
Leave everything behind. The greatest fear that I have regarding the outcome for America of these disclosures is that nothing will change. People will see in the media all of these disclosures. They'll know the lengths that the government is going to grant themselves powers unilaterally to create greater control over American society and global society. But they won't be willing to take the risks necessary to stand up and fight to change things, to force their representatives to actually take a stand in their interests. And the months ahead, the years ahead, it's only going to get worse until eventually there will be a time where policies will change, because the only thing that restricts the activities of the surveillance state are policy. Even our agreements with other sovereign governments, we consider that to be a stipulation of policy rather than a stipulation of law. And
so, interestingly enough, prior to this presentation, prior to putting this together, I didn't think this was as big of a concern as has been illustrated with the NSA scandal. Right? I thought that there would always be policy in place, and we would, stand up as a collective. I'm a huge Redditor, so the website reddit.com, they constantly gather around ideas and around violations, human rights violations, violations around online privacy and whatnot. And so they got together and they banded together to stop Reddit, to stop SOPA and to stop HIPAA, right? But then you develop what's known as fatigue after that. Like you develop activist fatigue, right? You rally all this effort and all this time and all this energy towards shutting something down or encouraging something, and then what happens when you can't compete against the speed and the resources of big business, of big government? And it makes me wonder, and I think that part of it is 1984 and that this stuff is happening and the surveillance is taking place and gross violations of our rights are taking place, but at the same time I also see the reality of Huxley, in which we're too passive. Right? When I say we, I don't mean everyone in the room, but I mean like the society, or especially the digital natives coming in, only 9% of which are very concerned about privacy. I see them very much being disabled, very much being, well, whatever, it's the cost of doing business, right? That is my greatest fear over here. So I think the work that I do and the work that I'm going to dedicate myself to certainly over the next couple of years is to helping, influence the work that we do over here, but also talking to lawmakers and policymakers to see if we can play a greater role in helping to recognize where we're headed if we don't if we're not critical of our media and not cognizant of media ecology theory. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.